When Man of Steel was released in 2013, it marked the beginning of the original era of the DC Extended Universe to depict the characters from the said comics. While the film itself was controversial at the time on sins from the themes depicted in the feature, it polarized audiences on critics from nearly everything shown within the film. But the speculative scenario is this: that time Pa Kent died in Man of Steel. Initially, when the film was released in theaters, Warner Brothers and DC executives believed that the sacrifice by Pa made sense from the Snyder point of view with what the DC Extended Universe was meant to depict. Thought any decision, no matter how noble or extraordinary, could have severe or dire consequences. In the film, Clark Kent was depicted as a 17-year-old at which Jonathan Kent didn't want to have him necessarily be exposed by his Kryptonian nature to Terran humans who might not understand or sympathize with the particular situation that he was in. Pa desired for Clark to grow up as a normal human being and as someone who knew the perils of life as well as the sacrifices that were needed to live. Pa knew that the world wasn't ready for Superman and knew that the only way to protect Clark was to die. A very common belief at the time was that Pa was trying to teach restraint, or in a wider scope of understanding, control of his powers to Clark in terms of a human sense, or even as a Kryptonian living within an Earth-based society. In a last bit of irony, opinions after the film was released had it that there were optimisms that humanity could cope with a Kryptonian among them, and that technically everything could or would be alright. However, when the events of the rest of the DC Extended Universe were taken into consideration, the world wasn't ready as Pa had hoped, and he essentially died for nothing. In the years and decades since its release, the entire scene of Jonathan Kent refusing to be rescued by Clark on the premise of such was considered to be arguably one of the worst mistakes within the DC Extended Universe. From information now known, the decision to have Paul die in such a way was later considered to be purposeful to give maximum death and shock value to the DC Extended Universe, and it was hoped that such a serious sacrifice in the literal first depiction of a DC Extended Universe film would give casual viewers the impression that DC films of the time were serious and should be taken as such. Analysts later commented that the impression of seriousness within the film was something that depended on the said situation. Clark saved students and even saved workers in prior examples to demonstrate heroism, all without consequence or questioning by witnesses or those he had saved. So the opinions were that these scenes were somewhat moot given the context or need to display power for the audience to see in Man of Steel. From the immediate era of the film's impact within the original DC Extended Universe to the time after, the sentiment had it that there were some truths that were actually debatable to if the scene had any meaning at all. It even went further than just opinions from film critics. Casual or DC audiences, as Kevin Costner, the actor who portrayed Jonathan Kent, later made public statements that he was initially curious about being affiliated to the Man of Steel, only to be disappointed with the script upon reading it and his role within the film. Despite Jonathan Kent dying in modern media for Superman, it was not always the case. There have been prior examples of Pa not dying as a method of motivation for Clark to understand his powers, or to give Superman's place on Earth a southern purpose. But it all depended on the screenwriting or even cause for having Clark Kent's adoptive parents in the said Superman adaptation.